Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Great to see so many of you here. My name is Ari Kelman. I'm on the faculty of the Graduate School of Education. I am also a faculty affiliate of the Taube Center for Jewish Studies and some other things besides. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you in the name of the Taube Center and the law school who collaborated to bring Dr. Britt Tevis to speak with us this afternoon. Dr. Tevis gave a talk earlier today that was great and received and raised a whole bunch of ideas that I'm excited to hear sort of brought to fruition this afternoon. I met Britt in December at a conference, having read her work previously, and immediately I was like, our community needs to hear from this person. She knows stuff that we need to know. And so she was gracious enough to come after a pretty exciting semester teaching a class on anti-Semitism in the law school at Columbia University. Not anti-Semitism in the law school. The class was on anti-Semitism. You get it. I'll proceed. I'll give her a formal introduction and then turn things over to her. Britt Tevis is the Renee Plasner postdoctoral fellow in Holocaust and Anti-Semitism Studies at Columbia University and a lecturer in law in the Columbia Law School. She earned her PhD at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and her JD at the University of Wisconsin Law School. Her research examines the intersections between Jews and American law, and her work has appeared in American Jewish History and the American Journal of Legal History and the Journal of American History. She's held fellowships at the Yale Program for the Study of Anti-Semitism at Yale, at the Katz Center for Advanced Judaic Studies at the University of Pennsylvania, and the Center for Anti-Racist Research at Boston University. And I can also share great news for me and for people who do what I do, which is that Britt just this morning accepted a tenure-track position at Syracuse University in the History Department. Which is generally awesome for Britt and her family, but also awesome for people like me because it means that I get to talk to Britt for the foreseeable future, and she gets to make contributions to the field. So please join me in welcoming her to campus. Thanks.
I just want to say thank you so much to Ari Kelman for the invitation and for just being such a wonderfully gracious host, and thank you to the Taube Center for Jewish Studies and the Concentration in Education and Jewish Studies at the Graduate School of Education. I'm very, very excited to be here today to have a discussion with you about anti-Semitism. And as you can see, the title of this lecture is Redefining Anti-Semitism in the United States, a Historical Approach. And the reason I decided I wanted to give this lecture is because I thought there weren't enough definitions of anti-Semitism out there in the world, and what the world really needed is one more. For those of you laughing, it means that you understand the joke that I'm making, which is that all of a sudden, anti-Semitism has become very, very topical and popular, which has been weirdly good for business. Not great for the world, but weirdly good for business. And there are for me some complications and problems with how popular the subject has been because it has become very apparent to me as a news reader that there is kind of a massive misunderstanding of what anti-Semitism is. And so I'm here today to clear everything up for everyone right away with the Tevis definition of anti-Semitism. You don't have to call it that, I do, but you can just say what anti-Semitism is. And I'm excited to say that I hope very much that when you leave here today, that you will have an actually useful analytical mechanism that you can apply in whatever situation you're in order to see, like, is this anti-Semitism or is this uncomfortable, mildly offensive, really not a problem at all? So I'm excited to arm everyone in here with this analytical tool. So again, I come to this definition that we're going to be talking about today as a historian. What does that mean? What does it mean that I'm coming to it as a historian? It means that the definition I'm about to generate for you is based on archival research, arguably for at least half a decade, but really for the last 2 years in a very concentrated way. I have amassed probably between 500 and 1,000 documents from 26 different archives in the United States that all directly address the subject of anti-Semitism. And that is from these documents and these incidents, which I'm about to share with you, really these are the highlights. But from these documents that I have generated, the definition of anti-Semitism that I am about to share with you. And before I do, I just want to remind you what we have, like why the dissatisfaction of what exists out there. Did anyone have the opportunity to read the Franklin Foer article in The Atlantic recently? Yeah, just one? A few? Okay. Does anyone remember what the definition offered in this? So Franklin Foer, an Atlantic journalist, offered a definition that tells us that anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory. A conspiracy theory. This is also the definition offered by Barry Weiss, a public intellectual, as well as by Deborah Lipstadt, who is the special envoy to the Biden administration for the envoy on anti-Semitism. Among Dara Horn, also a literary scholar, she too, writing in The Atlantic, claims that anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory. And I am here today to say that these are all, this definition is hugely troubling, too simplistic and problematic for a number of reasons. One of which is that it reduces anti-Semitism to this idea of rationality. And anti-Semitism, in many cases, is extremely rational. It's not right, it's not moral, it's not ethical, but it's rational. And so to reduce anti-Semitism to a conspiracy theory is to really miss the purpose of it and instead explain the motive. It also reduces anti-Semitism to this problem with it personalizes anti-Semitism. It makes it about someone's personal feelings. It suggests that if we just made everyone like Jews and appreciate them properly, then our problem would be solved and anti-Semitism would disappear. But the issue there is that anti-Semitism has become entrenched in systems. And even if everyone likes Jews, until we disentangle the anti-Jewish discrimination within those systems, anti-Semitism will not disappear. So those are my major misgivings with the current definitions of anti-Semitism, and that is why I'm asking you humbly, truly humbly, to consider the Tevis definition. And now I'm going to tell you what that is. Okay, there are 3 parts to this definition, 3 parts. The first is to understand that the purpose of anti-Semitism is to deny Jewish equality. It is to deny Jews their civil and political rights. How do I know this? Well, I look at, I've looked at these documents, which I'm about to share with you, and they tell us that in one way or another. But also, we know this because of the history and the origins of the term anti-Semitism, which came into existence in the late 19th century, in the 1870s, in Central Europe, in what had just become Germany, in the context of a discussion about who deserved rights in Germany. Who deserved rights? And there were a group of people who believed that Jews, in fact, did not deserve full citizenship in Germany. And they gave themselves a name. They called themselves anti-Semites. And that name was very sticky because it stuck. And we are still using that term today. Many people attribute the origins of this term to a journalist named Wilhelm Marr. It's unclear if he actually coined that term, but he certainly is responsible for popularizing it. And he was saying in his political program, I don't think Jews deserve full political rights here. I'm against it. I am anti people who speak Semitic languages. And this is his ideas were based on an idea of Jews as a race, which we're going to get into momentarily. He said, I'm against them having rights here. They're racially inferior. They don't deserve them. So both the historical origins of this term tell us that it's about rights, but also when we look to the examples that actually exist in the American context, this is also about rights. Now, one reason why understanding this political program is so incredibly confusing is because anti-Semitism manifests in so many different ways, and sometimes these manifestations are so different that it almost seems like questionable if we should group them together. So for example, we can probably all agree uniformly that murdering Jews in a synagogue, right, that the Tree of Life murders constitutes anti-Semitism. Murdering Jews because they're Jewish, almost anyone rational is going to say, yep, that's pretty central anti-Semitism, right? And many people would also agree that vandalizing a Jewish religious space is also anti-Semitism. But at the same time, intuitively, most of us can recognize there's a huge difference between vandalism, right? Tagging a Hillel building on a college campus and murdering Jews, right? Those are huge. How can we all, and there are some scholars, David Engel being one of them, who say these aren't alike things at all. We should not be categorizing them all under anti-Semitism. And I disagree with that critique because, again, we have to look at the purpose behind these actions. When Robert Brower went into the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, he explained on the internet he went to murder Jews because he was angry at Jewish advocacy on behalf of immigrants. He was angry that Jews were engaging in political expression because the implication is Jews should not have a political voice here. They don't deserve the full rights of citizenship, and I am going to kill them to make sure that they don't have the capacity to express themselves. Similarly, when Jewish religious spaces are tagged, that's saying to Jews, we don't think that you should have the right to public worship, a fundamental right that Jews have secured in this era of emancipation. My point again is in bringing both of these seemingly disparate examples is because I'm trying to say that even though these are clearly different manifestations of anti-Jewish discrimination and violence, they do in fact belong together because the major purpose again is to tell Jews, you are not equal. You do not deserve the full rights of citizenship here. For the Jewish historians, the people really grounded in modern Jewish history in this room, this is the opposite of emancipation, right? If emancipation is the blossoming of Jewish individual rights in the places they live, this is the opposite. This is saying you Jews don't deserve full political rights, and we are going to show that to you. We're going to make sure you understand that you don't deserve these full political rights. So the manifestations vary tremendously. Yes, that's true, but that still the purpose of these different manifestations are the same. Once again, it's to deny Jewish equality, Jewish political rights, Jewish civil rights, and ultimately human rights. Now, there are three major intellectual underpinnings of anti-Jewish discrimination, bigotry, and violence in the United States. There have been three major underpinnings, and we're going to look at those now in the remainder of the time. Often you'll see more than one in a given circumstance. Sometimes you'll only see one. Sometimes you'll see all three. They're often hard to disentangle. There are some people who would, for example, say like that Christianity and all religion constitutes conspiracy theory, right? So these aren't like hard boundaries between these three intellectual underpinnings. But I've categorized these broadly into three intellectual underpinnings. The first is Christianity, and really, just Christianity, Christian, both theological ideas. That particularly the notion, of course, that Jews are responsible for killing Christ. That's been that's been difficult for Jews to a difficult accusation to deal with, but also ideas that have merged within America between Christianity and nationalism, Christian nationalism. The second is what I'm calling racialism, and that's really the one that I personally am most interested in and will spend the most time talking about today, because number one, it's the most confusing in many ways, and number two, because it is the most, and to my mind, the most overlooked. So while there are scholars such as Leonard Dinerstein and Naomi Cohen who have identified Christianity as being one of the major motivators and for anti-Semitism in the United States, it is, there are a handful of historians who have, in very specific circumstances, pointed to racial theory and racial ideology, but not in a kind of broad, over-sweeping way to say that actually racial theory is a central component to anti-Semitism in the United States. Of course, it's well recognized in Europe and in Nazi Germany that race played a huge role there, but not here in the United States. And finally, conspiratorial thinking has played, of course, a third role. I'm going to talk about everyone's favorite book, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, but not only the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, also, the updated version, part 2, QAnon, which, woo. Okay, who's with me? Who's excited? We're all together? Okay. Anti-Semitism inspired by Christianity. And for those of you who are at the noon talk, pretend this is all new to you. So this here is a quotation that I have opted to include because we're in California, which is, obviously the best state in the country, and my native state, but also because this is such an amazingly illustrative example of the ways in which Christianity has motivated anti-Semitism in the United States. This is a quotation which I'll read. It says, this was said by a state assemblyman here in California in 1955, and this is as he's advocating for the passage of a Sabbath law that would bar people from working on Sunday. And this was known at the time and much discussed in newspapers as being economically harmful to Jews. It was known that because Jews who celebrated the Sabbath on Saturday would therefore also not be able to work on Sunday, that this would be economically harmful to them because they wouldn't be able to work 2 of the 7 days a week. And this was especially harmful in the case of immigrants who frequently didn't have excess money and needed to work. Again, he's advocating for the passage of this law. I have no sympathy with the Jews and would, were it in my power, enforce a regulation that would eliminate them not only from our county but from the entire state. I am for a Jew tax that is so high that Jews would not be able to operate any more shops. The basis of Republican institutions is the Christian Sabbath and the Christian religion. The Jews must join the majority. They are a class of people who come here only to make money and who leave the country as soon as they have money, which, by the way, wasn't true. Jews are actually one of the immigrant groups who stuck around. They do not invest any money, and they do not erect any of the beautiful houses that decorate our country. They all hope someday to settle in their Jerusalem. The Bible is the basis of our institutions, and the lawmaking process must support its commandments. So this was said in 1955. We see here, of course, this trope about Jewish greed and these notions that Jews are nomadic. They don't put down roots anywhere. This is the idea that they don't erect these beautiful houses. It's also a kind of a wink at notions of Jewish ugliness and the idea that Jews are racially, one of their racial characteristics is being ugly. And here, of course, he's advocating for the merging of church and state. This is the text, in fact, of the law that goes into effect in 1859. It's the Christian Sabbath law, in which, in fact, this is passed in California as well as states across the country, in which renders it illegal to work on Sunday. There's some really amazing scholarship by a historian named Batya Miller about the implementation of the Christian Sabbath law in New York City in the Lower East Side, and she went through court cases and found how Jewish peddlers were disproportionately targeted for having violated the Christian Sabbath laws, and talked about workarounds and really the economic harms imposed on them by police officers, by the court system for violating this law, which was, of course, enforced haphazardly and in a really discriminatory way, where Jews are, of course, targeted in their implementation. Now, again, I'm only picking one example of the ways in which Christianity has been used in order to promote discrimination within the legal system, right? To deny Jews the same rights that other people have, which is, of course, to work when they need to work and pray on Saturday. But one can probably, as a collective of this room, could probably together think about all of the other ways in which Christianity has led to anti-Jewish inequality. So, for example, the mandatory reading of the King James Bible in public schools, right? Anytime we're seeing a blurring of church and state, we're seeing Christianity promote anti-Semitism. The most recent thing I can think of, besides Trump's declaring that he wants to render America a Christian country, is should he be reelected, is the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade, and its use of a Christian understanding of when life begins as a way to implicitly tell Jews that their theological understandings of when life begins and their theological understandings of pregnancy are insufficient. They don't count. They don't count in the eyes of the Supreme Court. The real important moment of life is how Christians understand it. That, to my mind, is the Dobbs decision obviously doesn't mention Jews, but again, it upholds a very particular Protestant Christian understanding of life that by implication puts Jews' theological understandings of life, it makes those impossible to uphold. Okay, that's Christianity. This is my favorite one because it's kind of the most wild, I guess. Hopefully, many of you are familiar with scientific racism, but as I'm going to do an injustice. If there's a historian of race here and scientific racism, I apologize for the very, very. I'm afraid I won't do the entire history justice, but in short, ideas about race and the science of race and the notion of people being biologically distinct really hardened in the period after the Civil War. The theory of race and racial science was a science which we all know now is junk science, kind of like it's just junk science. But at the time, it held that everything you needed to know, that people are different, and we can tell their differences by looking at them, right? People have physical distinctions. We can categorize people by these physical distinctions, and these distinctions are not neutral. They're actually quite significant. And in fact, these distinctions tell you everything you need to know about a person's capacity to think and their moral capacity, how good they could potentially be. And this theory, again, scientific racism, these theories of human difference are used then and now to justify political movements. So in the United States, as you might imagine, you may be immediately thinking about slavery. Scientific racism was used in southern states to justify slavery, to say, we can't free these people. They're too childlike. They're too childlike. They look different. They do not have the mental capacity or the moral capacity to live freely like you and I. That's not possible. So when racialization happens, when people are espousing this theory of race, again, then and now, they are always telling you their politics. They are always telling you what their political program is. Jews, like everyone else, underwent racialization in the United States. And this became exceptionally problematic in the late 19th century. Number one, in this moment after the Civil War, after Reconstruction, where there's this massive rolling back of civil rights, right? The Supreme Court's like, yeah, we know we had about almost 10 years of like trying to give everyone rights and the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment and Civil Rights Act, but we're going to undo this. We're going to undo this, especially because this is targeted primarily at African Americans, but the same people are thought, who else do we not really love having rights here? Yeah, put the Jews in there too. We will impose anti-Jewish segregation because on them too, et cetera, et cetera. So this happens in the late 19th century, in the exact same moment that about 90% of Jews who are in the United States today land here. So before 1880, there are around 250,000, maybe 300,000 Jews in the United States. Between 1880 and 1924, 2.5 million arrive as a part of a larger 25 million person migration. And this is when this idea of racial science is hardening, and Jews become racialized. Here's some evidence. Okay, what do we got here? Let's use this picture. This picture is from 1879. What it's depicting is a moment in which a railroad and hotel owner named Austin Corbin moved to exclude Jews from his hotel and from his railroad. Again, for those of you who are Americanists, you can hear the echoes of African American history, right? Because Black people are also being excluded from public transport in this moment. So he decides to bar Jews from his hotel, the Manhattan Beach Hotel. And this is a depiction of that event. You can see up here that flag, it says Manhattan Beach. That's how we know this is his hotel. So who are the Jews to the 19th century viewer? Like, what do we see? I want to see how good of anti-Semites you are. All right, so we know these are Jews. How do you know they're Jews? Okay, so we know that Jews have big noses. Again, this is all stereotype. There are plenty of Jews who do not, in fact, have it. I'm trying to suss out, what is this racial stereotype that exists? One, we know that Jews all have big noses, apparently. What else? They have large lips. Who said hair? I'm hearing hair. That's right. They have dark hair. It's kinky. It's reminiscent, right, of African American hair. That's intentional. What else? That's right. This man is extremely gaudy, right? You can tell because he has all of these oversized jewels. What else? What are also the Jewish racial characteristics?
Dark skin.
Dark skin, amazing, wonderful. That's right. Jews at the end of the 19th century and start of the 20th century are perceived as having dark skin. They're frequently called swarthy or sallow, not white, not white. These are Ashkenazi, from Eastern Europe Jews, dark skin. What else? Pale?
No.
Oh.
Black hair.
Oh, black hair. That's right. They have very dark, curly hair.
That man's wearing a dress.
Well, that's interesting. That man is wearing a dress. So this is actually a Jewish woman. A Jewish woman who is very intentionally portrayed as being very masculine. Because in Jewish racial tropes, Jewish women actually appear and behave like Jewish men. And it's not as clear in this picture, but Jewish men are frequently, actually one of my favorite, as Jewish women. Jewish men are portrayed as Jewish women. And there's an amazing cartoon depicting a very similar event in which these Jewish couple, it's just, I have to analyze it one day. It's an amazing photo that emphasizes this point. Anything else? What about the similarity between the mom and the dad and the kid? What is that telling us? Inbred, they all look the same, but what does it mean that they're all, they really look the same? Incestuous. So what they're telling us, first of all, yes, there are many implications of Jewish sexual perversion which date back and are linked to ideas about Jewish blood libel, but this is also supposed to be conveying that the Jewish race, that it's immutable. It can't change. That race is destiny. Jews cannot intermarry. They are distinctly Jewish. They're distinctly Jewish. Maybe they're black. If we have to uphold the black-white paradigm, they're black. But actually, they're probably just Jewish. That's what this picture is conveying to us. And not only this postcard that is capturing this moment in 1879 in which we see this exclusion from this hotel. And we also, the contrast with, right, the welcome guests. I should add that the trope, the reason given in this moment about Jewish women is that they're loud, they're gaudy, they're obnoxious. These are racial features that are inescapable. Just keep that in mind, inescapable. Again, I should add, just in case for clarification, this was not true. Not all Jewish people are anything, right? But this was the idea that racial scientists were going around promoting at the time to justify treating them differently, to justify excluding them from, for example, their hotels, their neighborhoods, their places of employment, other places of public accommodation, from their educational institutions. This is the justification. Here we have another image in which we see this Jewish man who is not standing straight, who has an oversized nose, who's bald. This is articulating this idea that Jews are, as a racial group, were responsible for certain types of crime. And one of the types of crime attributed to Jews was the crime of arson fraud, the idea that Jews burned their own property, both because they were callous and didn't care about if they took human lives, because human lives don't mean anything to Jews, and also the idea that Jews are just so greedy and so money obsessed that they're willing to burn things down and put everyone else in danger in order to fraudulently collect on their policies. So this figure, this Jewish arsonist, was really ubiquitous at the start of the 20th century. And again, this is a racialized notion of what crimes Jews do. And almost universally, they involve money. Here is probably my favorite example of this Jewish racialization. I know I'm harping on this, but it's quite important for understanding the legal aspects of this. This is from an 1888 publication titled "The Original Mr. Jacobs: A Startling Expose, or an Account of the Life, Customs, and Habits of Jews," written by a Greek immigrant. And in this book, one can find this very useful diagram titled "How We May Know Him." How do we know the Jew? Well, here are his physical characteristics. Restless, suspicious eyes, curved nose and nostrils, ill-shapen ears of great size, like those of a bat, thick lips and sharp rat's teeth. This is my favorite one because I still haven't figured it out. Round knees. Like, does anyone not have round knees? I'm dead. I'm completely serious. This has been kind of the mystery for a few years for me. I'm like, what did that mean? Okay, round knees, low brow, long clammy fingers. And I should say that this is ordinarily Jewish hands are depicted as very fat because they're frequently depicted grabbing money. So this artist was not a very good anti-Semite, I guess, because of the fingers are too thin. But that's personal critique. Flat feet, and then finally, of course, the repulsive rear view, which I don't know if this was supposed to be symbolic, but this was supposed to, of course, repulse the viewer. So this is a diagram that you could very conveniently rip out of this book so that when you encountered a Jew, you could check if you could make sure, is this a Jew or not a Jew? Which was important because another actually distinctly Jewish racial feature was their chameleon-like capacity. They could blend in very easily. And this was very nerve-wracking because often, because they could change their names, right? Which Jews, in fact, did do at a higher rate than non-Jews because, of course, they were trying to, in fact, sidestep anti-Semitism, right? If you had to write a Jewish name on, say, an application to, I don't know, Stanford or University of Michigan or any of the many schools that had anti-Jewish quotas, Jews often aspired to sidestep this discrimination by, in fact, changing their names, which was well known among by anti-Semites, and that was nerve-wracking. Or, for example, among insurers who didn't want to sell insurance policies to Jews who, of course, are racially arsonists. So why would you put your business, in peril like that? So the idea of Jewish name changing in a chameleon-like capacity, the way that they could hide themselves, was a distinctly Jewish characteristic that was very problematic. That's why one would need such a diagram so that you could, I guess, walk around New York figuring out who they were. Okay, how did this play out in the legal system? It played out in the legal system, if you were at my afternoon talk, as you know, in many, many, many ways. One way is the way that Jews encountered investigators and police. And they are, again, depicted, what you're looking at right here is a kind of a wanted posting, like a poster that went up in Cook County in Chicago in the 1890s, and it says that this man who had an alias, a Polish Jew, we needed to arrest because he obtained money by false pretenses. It's a pretty vague accusation, and you know him if you see him because he has a slim-built, black hair, sallow complexion. Again, that means dark, does not mean white, does not mean light-skinned. It means dark. Jews were perceived as having dark skin. Dark brown eyes, long, thin, drooping black mustache, short side whiskers, obviously a Hebrew nose. That's a joke because what is that? And features, he speaks good German and English, but poor Polish and French. Okay, so this is a racialized idea that appears in Chicago. We also know this because of the use of phrenology in Jewish criminal cases. What is phrenology, you may ask? No one here is an avid phrenologist. Is that how phrenologist? It is the science of measuring skulls in order to determine people's race. And this was a commonly practiced science. Again, huge wink, which, I say huge wink, but it was taken very, very seriously at the end of the 19th century and start of the 20th, although it had become actually disreputable by the time of 1924 when these images are appearing in newspapers in Chicago. But phrenology, again, was this idea that you could measure people's skulls and determine their racial identity based on those skull measurements. One of the most famous practitioners of this was a guy named Samuel Morton. There's an absolutely incredible book about this, the scientific study by, it's called The Mismeasure of Man by, I'm just blanking on his name, The Mismeasure of Man. It's by Gould. Thank you, Stephen J. Gould, right? Phenomenal text. Can't recommend it enough if you are interested in phrenology as a historical phenomenon. These are images of Leopold and Loeb, two Jewish college students at the University of Chicago who are charged and probably correctly convicted of murdering a 14-year-old Bobby Franks, and their trial is just drowning in the repetition of anti-Jewish racial tropes, including accusations of homosexuality. Homosexuality is another supposedly distinctly, again, if you're going to have the feminized Jewish man, homosexuality is a corollary. It also speaks to Jews' supposed sexual perversion. So the images you're looking at ran in the Chicago Tribune, and these are the use of phrenology trying to use their skulls to prove their racial proclivity to commit the crime that they are accused of. We also can look to how race influenced anti-Jewish discrimination by looking at discussions of the supposed Jewish race in American immigration law, which is pretty broadly, if people will concede that American history includes anti-Semitism, they will look to American immigration law. The Dillingham Commission was a congressional commission that produced a report that became the underlying basis of the 1921 emergency quota law, and the emergency quota law was the foundation for the 1924 Johnson-Reed Immigration Act. The 1924 Johnson-Reed Immigration Act is commonly referred to as the quota law, and it is a law that severely, severely, severely restricts immigration to the United States, and it does so using a extraordinarily imprecise formula that was taken from the 1890 census. The proponents of the 1924 immigration law said, hey, America is special, I mean, obviously, and we need to make sure that it's made up of the right people. And so the whole purpose of the immigration system is, of course, to determine who is a desirable immigrant and who is an undesirable immigrant. But we haven't done a good enough job. We're not doing that well. So we need to come up with like a better system. We were much more comfortable, this is Congress saying this, we're much more comfortable with the racial balance that existed in America, before those new people. Has anyone seen The Gilded Age on HBO? No. Well, there's Christine Baranski gives this really funny, amazing speech about the new people. Never the new, only the old. Never the new. Who are the new? Jews, Italians, Irish, they're the new. We don't want them. So we better return to this better time before all those people arrived, and we will base this quota on this 1890 census, when we were much more comfortable with the racial balances in this country. So that's what this Dillingham Commission, let's go look inside. What do we find in the commission? Oh, of course, maps and texts from this man, William Z. Ripley, who was one of the major proponents of racial science here in the United States. He writes this book, The Races of Europe, and basically it's copy-paste whatever the, late 19th, early 20th century, the 1907 version of copy-paste is. This is a map directly taken from The Races of Europe, which is employed in the Dillingham Commission in order to determine what percentage, what number of people should we take from each country. We're going to take a certain number. We've got to figure out how. It's important that we know this because this tells us, what does it tell us? The geographical distribution of Jews. The geographical distribution of Jews in Eastern Europe. And if we know that these regions have a lot of Jews, according to this scale, who wants to guess what regions are going to be severely restricted in the law? Any takers? It's going to be people from here. Which we see, in fact, here is a discussion. So in the 1921 emergency quota law, this is from a House report determining who's going to be left out, who should we leave out. The great bulk of immigrants to the United States from this district, from the Russian Caucasus, are highly undesirable as material for future American citizens. Again, what is anti-Semitism about? It's a political program aimed at denying Jews' rights, aimed at denying them citizenship, aimed at denying them the capacity to engage in American politics. So it's a great thing if that is your aim, to in fact keep them out of the country to begin with, then you don't have to deal with the problem later. They are not only illiterate, by the way, of course they're illiterate because for a long time the Immigration Bureau refused to account Yiddish as a language, which was the primary language that Jews were coming to this country with. They're not only illiterate, but the years of unsettled conditions which they have been forced to live have caused them to lose the habit of work. Here they're saying Jews are lazy. Their physical and moral courage is greatly depleted, as well as their physical constitutions. Again, physicality, intellectual, and morality. They're the same. They're the same. And you can tell exactly when you look at a person what all three are immediately. The bulk of them have been habituated either to lawlessness or to the exercise of violence in the name of the law for so long that if not actually impregnated with Bolshevism, that's a great phrase, impregnated with Bolshevism, they are good material for Bolshevik propaganda. Our restrictions should be so rigid that it would be impossible for most of these people to enter the country. Reference is especially made to Armenians, Jews, Persians, and Russians of the ordinary classes, all of which have been driven so hither and thither since 1914, since the start of World War I, that they can't be regarded as desirable populations by any country. There are, of course, many individual exceptions. So Jewish rootlessness, supposed rootlessness, has made them lazy, has made them incapable of work. Of course, by the way, if you came here with a job that rendered you deportable, because then you were violating American labor law, you both needed to have the capacity to work, but not an actual job in order to make it into the country. So they're lazy, but also they come with too many jobs. It's always both. So again, this is an example, Jewish racialization enabling this process of the aim of denying Jewish rights. Okay, now I'm running out of time, so I have to get to the third one just to make my point. Conspiratorial thinking. Again, I'm not saying conspiracy theory is not significant. Franklin Foer, Barry Weiss, a broken clock is right twice a day. Mary Weiss, Dara Horn, Deborah Lipstadt. There was a fifth person who I was literally upset with. Oh, Jonathan Greenblatt. Yeah, they're all this conspiracy theory. It's not that it's completely not right. It's partially right. It's just not the whole picture because there's rational thinking behind this agenda. It's just not the whole picture. So conspiratorial thinking. What you're looking at now are all texts that I discovered in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. last year. They're all different versions of a text that many of you may have heard of before called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It is a text that originates in Russia as a series of newspaper articles in 1903 and eventually makes its way to the United States vis-a-vis military attaches that are stationed in Europe after World War I. It's translated and distributed throughout the entire State Department and Department of Defense, who for many years believed that this is a prophecy and that it is coming true, So the text is supposedly the meeting minutes of the Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion. I actually find the Elders of Zion fine, but I find the idea of wise men, if there's going to be a Jewish conspiracy, Jewish women better be included. Okay, don't try to tell me there's a big world conspiracy and Jewish women are not involved. Okay, it's one or the other. Either, it's the sexism in addition to the anti-Semitism that just takes it over the top for me. All right, intersectionality, but it still hurt my feelings a little. So this text was disseminated and again circulated within these federal bureaucracies who genuinely believed that these were coming true. The texts are supposedly meeting minutes of these older Jewish men and their plot for world domination. The plot involves both stealing land globally, taking control of the banks. It's anything you hear people talking about George Soros today, anything he's being said, or anything he's up to, that's what these wise men and the Elders of Zion are up to. They're trying to control journalism, they're trying to control newspapers, they're trying to show your children obscene movies. That's Henry Ford was particularly not happy about that. And they're trying to, this is a Jewish plot for world domination. Now again, what I'm trying to say again is the Department of Defense and the State Department, for many years, these top officials believed that these were true, that this was an authentic articulation of Jewish desires. That led to some problems for Jews here. And I'm going to briefly, this is the Dearborn Independent, a publication that Henry Ford produced. He disseminated about 500,000 copies of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. If you bought a Model T, you got one free. So that's a bonus. I don't have time to go into this, but one of my favorite kind of conspiracy theories, is, which the earliest version I have is from 1776, is this idea that Jews are in cahoots with Black Americans, that they are working together to harm white Americans. And so here, that's why you see this Jewish jazz. That is like a tip of the hat to this idea, again, that Jews are working with Black people to hurt white people. The earliest articulation of that I found was from 1776, but it doesn't become really popular until after the Civil War. So here are, I'm just going to read one. This is from the Military Intelligence Division records. And there's a great book on this, by the way, if anyone's really interested in this subject, by a guy named Joseph Bendersky. It's called The Jewish Threat. It's really like, woof. I don't know. I study this, and every time, like, it's very shocking. It's crazy what people tend to believe. Okay, this is, I'm going to read the one on the left. Have you ever read these documents on the Jewish protocols? If not, I strongly urge you to read them. I have read them through very carefully twice, and I've underlined several names. Note the list of Jews on pages 7, 8, and 9, among whom is listed Victor Berger. It reads like good dope, and recent world developments would seem to bear out the protocols. From Captain Snow, Military Intelligence 4, the recent world events he's referring to are both the Balfour Declaration, in which Britain decided to acknowledge or promote, accept the creation of a Jewish national homeland in Mandate Palestine, as well as the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, in which there was a presumption, not inaccurately, but that Jews were hyper involved in. They thought this because, in fact, Jews were they were, in fact, initially quite supportive of Bolshevism, because the Bolsheviks promised to outlaw anti-Semitism. And if you are a Jew in Russia or in America in the 19-teens and 20s, and someone comes along and says, guess what? Part of our political platform is we're going to completely render it illegal to be an anti-Semite, and you're Jewish, you might say, really? That's kind of interesting. Now, most of us know that's not how things worked out. That's not how things worked out. But the promise at the time sounded pretty good. It sounded pretty good. So those are the world events that seem to bear out these protocols. This is a fun quotation from an imperial wizard. And anytime I can say the words imperial wizard, but I want to get to the Q&A. So I'm just going to skip ahead to today, again, emphasizing how conspiratorial thinking has contributed to anti-Semitism. Here we have our illustrious former House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy promoting the idea. It says it's a tweet saying, or an X, whatever. We cannot allow Soros, Steyer, and Bloomberg to buy this election. Get out and vote Republican November 6th. So here we have a major leader in the Republican Party, the Speaker of the House, promoting the idea that a non-American Jew is attempting to buy a political election with his Jew buddies. I mean, this is both in aesthetic and in the content of the accusation itself, just hyper reminiscent of the protocols. We also, I'm sure many of you may have heard, Jews have space lasers, other fun versions of the conspiracy theory. Jews are using fluoride to poison Americans. Jonas Salk, what did he? The polio vaccine is an effort to poison Americans. That COVID-19 is also a Jewish conspiracy, right? Jews are menacing to American health. There's like my favorite one recently, and I'm calling dibs right now. I'm saying I am doing this research. Don't try to take it from me if I'm going to tell you this. My favorite one that I came across recently was the idea, and this is really quite bananas to me, that even though a minority of Americans are against abortion rights, a minority, but within that minority, a plurality believe that abortion is a conspiracy being propagated by, and this is my favorite alliance, Jewish doctors and lesbian nurses. And what I find kind of astounding, there's no possibility of there being Jewish lesbian doctors or Jewish nurses or lesbian doctors. There's just Jewish doctors. There are only Jewish doctors and lesbian nurses. This is, of course, both, they call this the real Holocaust. So there's an element of Holocaust denial in this conspiracy theory, as well as echoes of blood libel and the notion that Jews kill Christian babies to use their blood to make matzah for Passover. I'm not a fan of matzah, to be honest with you, but and I'm happy that Passover's over right now. So the conspiracy theories, really, there's a long kind of quite genuinely, but I mean, people can be creative sometimes. Okay, in conclusion. The space aliens, yeah. So we're up to all sorts of things. It's a very busy life. Right. So in conclusion, I once again want to emphasize, I think a hyperfixation, as we are kind of hearing about right now, on speech and a hyperfixation on Israel, frankly, has really minimized the true essence of what constitutes anti-Semitism. It's like as a group, scholars have really dropped the ball and lost the main thread, the main narrative, and what they're supposed to be looking for and what we're supposed to be studying. Particularly if we are invested, as I am personally, in sustaining a democracy and sustaining a multiracial, diverse democracy. We need to include and understand anti-Semitism as a problem to be solved, and we can't do that if we don't actually understand what anti-Semitism is, if we're only going to be thinking about it as a conspiracy theory, instead of understanding that its purpose is to deny Jews participation in the political arena. So I appreciate listening, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and feedback and questions and critiques. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so because the language of anti-Semitism has been weaponized by both Jews and anti-Semites, and because, as you demonstrated, there's no consensus on what the term means, I know that some people, maybe like in the Barry Weiss camp, have pushed towards changing the language altogether and calling it something like Jew hatred, though I can't see a distinction there. But I'm wondering if you think that we have a language problem. And that there might be some kind of, including this idea that anti-Semitism includes Arabs, that we might sort of shift the language.
So the question was about whether or not anti-Semitism and the word anti-Semitism remains useful, given that the waters are so muddied, and particularly because there are questions about, well, the origins of anti-Semitism, did that include the speakers of other Semitic languages like Arabic? So first of all, if it's Barry Weiss specifically who has come up with the critique of why we shouldn't use this word, like just because she doesn't understand it doesn't mean that we all don't understand it. And I'm using Barry Weiss, of course, here as a straw man. I don't actually know this woman. But that is to say that I agree there has been a massive misunderstanding of anti-Semitism. In part, that is because the field of American Jewish history has been so resistant to, in fact, studying anti-Semitism. The field of modern Jewish history generally has treated anti-Semitism as being real in Europe, which is, of course, treated like this monolithic place. There's, to my mind, one of the most important articles of American Jewish history is an article by Tony Michaels about American Jewish exceptionalism. If you are interested in thinking about why anti-Semitism in the United States is treated differently, I really, run, don't walk to read that article. But no, I think that anti-Semitism, it's like, I think akin to saying like we should give up the word racism because people find it so confusing and there's so many meanings to racism, so we don't even need the word anymore. Most people would acknowledge that anti-Semitism has something to do with Jews to the extent that David Duke refuses to acknowledge that he is an anti-Semite, right? If David Duke knows to disclaim the label, then people understand, I think most people understand that it does have to do with Jew hatred. And so rather than, throw the baby out with the bathwater, I'm attempting to kind of reclaim it by actually clarifying what it means. But that's a great question.
So thank you so much for this talk. In thinking about, you were hoping to give us some analytic tools for anti-Semitism.
Yes.
And along those lines, one of the things many people are concerned about right now is the ethnic studies curriculum being promoted in California that has a version that includes what many people feel are highly anti-Semitic components of the curriculum. And we have somebody who introduced you who's from the education school, professor in the ed school, so maybe I don't know if you've reached out to think at all about these educational issues and ethnic studies curricula.
I'm not familiar with specifically what the component of the curriculum is that is supposedly anti-Semitic, but I would say that if the state of California is mandating education, an ethnic studies education, that Jews absolutely ought to be included in that. I mean, the mere idea that they wouldn't be included is, I mean, can't we just send them the quotation from William Stowe? Like, it's just, it's bananas on its face of it, to my mind.
Well, what people are saying is that it includes anti-Zionism must be included as an essential element of what is taught.
So the question, okay,
and and so there's the whole anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, and that it doesn't include anything about, I don't know, Jewish civilization, the Holocaust. It doesn't include anything about diversity and inclusion for Jews. It includes Jews as oppressors.
Yeah. So I would take serious issue with the omission of Jews from that curriculum. And what I'd say about anti-Zionism is that it's sometimes, I know this is not the popular answer to it, but sometimes anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Not always. Not always. I know this is a dirty word, but it really does matter on context. The context matters. The context really matters. The speaker matters. Intent matters. I'm a historian. I'm semi-sickened with myself for coming up with a theory. It was an accident, truly. So really context matters, and I think needs to be taken into account when determining whether anti-Zionism constitutes anti-Semitism.
Hi, thanks so much. This is really fascinating. I had a question. So my background is in French studies, and so race, what is that? We don't have that. We're all the same. So I'm wondering about kind of how you view this, because it was very clear in your presentation that you're focusing on the American context, and yet anti-Semitism is not just something that we have here. So I'm wondering kind of how do you see this intervention in kind of the broader conversations about
anti-Semitism globally?
Yes,
Yeah.
or throughout history, not just within the confines of U.S. specific.
Right. So you are correct to say that this was an analysis entirely based on the American context. And it's so funny that you ask how this fits into this global context, because as an Americanist, the current literature, with the exception mostly of Tony Michaels, has been that, anti-Semitism is obviously a global problem. Everyone knows that it's France. Are you kidding? Everyone knows there's anti-Semitism in France. Nazi Germany. Need I say more? Right? The idea that one would need to, I'm just laughing that, yes. So basically, yes, anti-Semitism has been a problem globally, and I subscribe to the work and ideas of the historian David Sorkin, who tells us that the broadest framing from Jewish history for the past 500 years is this idea of emancipation. The idea that when Jews transitioned from getting rights as communities in the places they lived, and transitioned from the existence of vertical alliances in which one person would represent each individual Jewish community and secure rights for that community with the political authority that they are, right? Secure residential rights, secure employment rights for Jews as a group. When that norm transitioned into the norm of Jews having rights as individuals, as we do here in the United States, that transition takes place and is still taking place, by the way, over the course of the last 500 years. And the securing of those rights, those individual rights, the opposite of that is anti-Semitism, right? If emancipation is the blossoming of Jews' individual rights, anti-Semitism is the unwinding of those rights. And it's a never a linear process. It's a push-pull process that's ongoing, right? And today we can still see that playing out in various ways in America and elsewhere. And so this paradigm, really, I'm just trying to say that Jewish history actually fits within this larger global paradigm of modern Jewish history. We're not distinct. I hate to tell American Jews this, but we're not. I mean, we are special, but not really. Not really. We're just we are a manifestation of Jewish modernity, just like French Jews, just like German Jews, just like Jews elsewhere. So I guess I'm like the French. We're all the same.
Yeah, I loved the talk. So my background is in German studies, and so I want to sort of engage in some gentle back and forth about your use of emancipation as a concept, and think about the larger questions that it raises about what was called, in the 19th century, the Jewish question. Which is a thing that I see playing out actually most interestingly right now within Israeli society. So like within a society, and within Israeli Jewish society especially. So within groups of Jews, there is often a framing of emancipation wherein in order to become fully emancipated political individuals, it is demanded, required, etc., that people to some extent give up degrees of communal attachment. So you see this in Israeli society right now with discussion of the Haredim, right? You see it in America sometimes, again, with discussions of, to what extent should an ultra-Orthodox school get away with not teaching English, not teaching science, not teaching the things that people need to learn to be engaged political individuals. You see it when countries debate banning circumcision because there's sort of individual rights that are set at odds with communal rights. And so thinking about those tensions, I want to ask how you use the concept of emancipation and what you think of the ways that it has been sort of called a demand, right? The idea of like, in order to emancipate yourself as an individual, you also have to emancipate yourself from your own Jewishness, etc.
That's a great question. And you're definitely pointing to this underbelly, right? Emancipation is not just like, great, we have individual rights, woohoo! It's, yes, the demands of individual countries. You need to pray. Your day of worship needs to be on a different day, right? Or stop dressing like that. Dress like the rest of us. And in fact, the imperial wizard, part of his demand is they are not like us. Also, William Stowe, right? They need to start acting like the majority. They need to read the Christian. They need to read the Christian Bible. I actually think there have been a lot of demands put on Jews in America in order to secure their rights as citizens. And I'm just going to give you some examples. And American Jews in the field of modern Jewish history get a lot of flack for this idea that many of you have probably heard about assimilation, right? There's always, Jews in America. In fact, there's such Jews are in America gets like so much kind of flack for this, that the field of modern Jewish history says, Jews, why would you study American Jews? Jews just go to America and disappear, right? That because they assimilated in. And I really take issue with that, because when we look at things such as, there are a few years in New York City when, in order to register to vote, you could do it on one of 3 Saturdays or Yom Kippur. Okay, so you either are going to have to make, right, this is the choice you have to make is either complying with demands of your religion and observing Shabbat and Yom Kippur as mandated, right, by the rabbis and Jewish texts, or you can have your voting rights. That's the option. Those are the choices. And that's the ugliness of emancipation that I think you're pointing to, that certainly existed in the Central European context and absolutely existed in this context. You want to send your kids to public schools, you're going to have to deal with them reading the King James Bible, right? That is, and this use of also Jewish time as really, in New York City, they used to have jury trials on Saturdays, which meant that one day a week, right, 1 out of 6 days, Jews were ineligible by definition to sit on juries, right, which is, a constitutional right, like that is enshrined in the Constitution, the importance of jury service as a sign of citizenship. So your intuition, I think, is exactly correct, and yeah.
Yep.
Looking at your definition and like the way in which you suggest that right-wing movements like have this tendency towards anti-Semitism, how does one square the fact that today we find so many Jews like in these right-wing circles which promote like some of these like I don't know, like anti-abortion, Ben Shapiro, anti-immigration, Stephen Miller.
Sure. So the question is like so first of all, I want us to say that I did not by any means intend to suggest that anti-Semitism is merely a right-wing phenomenon. It's so sweet. It's the thing that the left and the right share. And by way of example of that, and I will come back to the question of Ben Shapiro. By way of example of that, this process of Jewish racialization, the far right, of course, right, the Chabad shooter in 2019, Ernst, I think is his name, right? He writes this 19-page manifesto about Jews and the Jewish race and them infiltrating, the aliens infiltrating America, and that's why he has to go in and do this murder. And he was like a very rational guy, by the way. He was a concert pianist and a nurse and very well educated and came from like this, the manifesto I do not recommend. It literally haunts me. But he saw, right, so right wing, the far right sees Jews as racially distinct and Jews will never be white. But the far left, of course, sees Jews as uniformly and perennially white, right? You are white, you have the wrong politics, you are white. So that it's, of course, race is, as we all know, race is not a real scientific fact. It is a political category. It's a political core category that is meant to advance a political agenda. So the racialization is, of course, happening on both sides. How Jews are racialized are different from each side. It's according to like the politics trying to be pushed in that specific moment. As far as how do I account for the fact that there are Jews in these spaces in which there are anti-Semitic ideas being expressed, I mean, I think it's really about the individual and like where, so I don't think that Ben Shapiro would be invited into, you know, that group of Charlottesville marchers. I doubt that Proud Boys would, you know, fully embrace him and accept them into, or my favorite kind of right-wing frat boy organization, which is called, and I love this group only for their name, which is the New Jersey European Heritage Association or Society. But I just love the idea of these like people and these like men in New Jersey, like the New Jersey European Heritage. Anyway, they're like a New Jersey Proud Boys. They aren't accepting Jews. Like Ben Shapiro. So Ben Shapiro, yes, can engage and you know, partake in certain spaces on the right, but I don't think he's universally welcomed everywhere. And similarly on the left, right? Jews on the left can also move in and out of certain left spaces, but there are, as we've learned recently, right, there are certain places that Jews are definitively not welcomed on the left. Hopefully that satisfies, yeah.
It's an excellent presentation.
Oh, thank
One
you.
area that you didn't touch on are the Immigration Acts in the 1900s singled out Jews for diseases.
Oh yeah.
So there's very extensive literature that you should include.
Oh yeah, I'm blanking right now on the historian of science who wrote some really, the comment was about which is also of course part of their racial characteristics, Jews being carriers and vectors of certain diseases. Diabetes Act, there's a really great book by a historian at Duke named Eileen. Ooh, I'm so sorry for forgetting your name. It was just basically a cultural history of diabetes and these ideas that it were associated diabetes with Jews, and so people didn't really feel compelled to try to cure it, and that inclination only became worse as it became associated with African Americans.
The whole spectrum of diseases.
That's
that had
tuberculosis,
justification.
Savus. This like really, don't look it up. It's not for the weak stomach. Yes, yeah.
It makes physician, so it makes fascinating reading.
Okay, that's why you. Yeah. You probably would be able to handle it.
Can you go back please to the slide with the definition?
So
I was curious on how would you define the term civil and political rights? And are we talking only about political rights within, let's say, non-Jewish society, or are we talking about the political right to, for instance, have a nation state? And accordingly, would you say that denying the right of the Jewish people to have a nation state is per se anti-Semitism or not?
Did you want to kill me or something? No. Thank you for that. It took me, and it pains me, I'm jealous of how quickly you understood to ask yourself that question, because it took me much longer than that, like by years. But the question was whether or not I would include this under this concept of rights, denial of the right for Jews to have their own nation state, and whether or not that in itself constitutes anti-Semitism. And the answer for me is yes. And the reason is because I'm very gung-ho. In my immigration law class, I was the one person being like, we shouldn't have borders because I didn't, anyway, right? So like, I'm okay with no nationalisms. You want to get rid of nationalism? Let's get rid of nationalism. Like, let's have a utopian society. I genuinely would love that. I would. But if we're going to have some nationalisms, I don't understand why one nationalism is granted legitimacy and another is not. And that will need to be explained to me in great detail in order for me to sign on to the idea that like certain people are allowed to have national identities and certain other people are not. I don't understand why that would be the case. And why is it that Jews are not allowed to have a national identity? That seems odd. That to me seems unequal. And that's how, to my mind, this undermining, which is not to say that Israel in its current iteration is necessarily the only manifestation of what it means to have Jewish political equality. I'm not saying that either. I'm saying that if we're going to deny certain people, if we're going to acknowledge certain people's right to national self-determination and nationalism, then Jews absolutely merit that same acknowledgement. And to do anything less, in fact, it does constitute inequality and therefore is anti-Semitism. But I'm so impressed by how quickly you like understood to like, you went right, whew, wow, respect.
When did Jews become white?
The question of when did Jews become white? Well, that is a very loaded question and one that historians have answered in a variety of ways. But as I've tried to point to today, the answer is never. They've never become white, or they've always been white, or there is no white. So it depends on who we ask, right? So for non-Jews, let's take first and foremost non-Jews. The process of racialization for Jews has involved expressions of political ideology. So at the end of the 19th century, when really this racial theory hardens and race becomes perceived of as immutable, at the end of the 19th century, there were some racial scientists who said Jews are black. These racial scientists subscribed to a binary theory of race in which there's two races. There are black people and there are white people. And these scientists said, well, Jews are not clearly not white because, first of all, whiteness required being Protestant. So, they're eliminated from that. So they must be black. That was one answer. There was another minority of people who said, well, no, they're not black. Clearly they're not black. So I guess begrudgingly we'll acknowledge that they're white, but not really white because they're Caucasian, right? There's pure white, and then there's like these ethnic, the Italians, the Irish, right? The Matthew Fry Jacobson theory. Then there was a third group, and Eric Goldstein writes in The Price of Whiteness that this was the vast majority of people in America who understood Jews, and by the way, in Nazi Germany too, who understood Jews as members of the Jewish race. And they even had a great word for this. They called them Hebrews. Hebrew was the racialized conceptualization of Jews. Now, the American federal government subscribed to this theory because in 1899, the Bureau of Immigration adopted a racial categorization of Jews and in fact started to apply the word Hebrew to Jewish immigrants on their immigration papers. This is how non-Jews understood it. For Jews, they had, of course, a different understanding of when Jews became white or if they are white, and that was based on their own political motives, of course. For Jews in the United States, such as Louis Brandeis, for Jews primarily of Central European descent who had just made it into like the upper echelons of society. They, got to join the bar associations. They got to be part of special clubs, private clubs. They said, we've always been white. Particularly, and this was especially important to this group of Central European Jewish lawyers who had been working to assist Americans of Chinese descent who were being prosecuted under the Chinese Exclusion Act, a law in 1881 that basically more or less rendered a Chinese immigration illegal to America. And it was a race-based specific law passed in 1881 and then again in 1891, right, saying we're barring all, basically the American federal government was like, you built our railroads, get out, okay? So Jews were heavily involved in trying to protect these, again, Americans of Chinese descent, and they understood, like, if they can pass a Chinese Exclusion Act, right, imagine if this, I think this is also why Jews were up in arms with, like, the Muslim ban, right? There's this inherent understanding, like, this could easily been applied to us because that's happened before. So for them, they said we should not identify as a race. Look how dangerous it is to be differentiated. Of course, this is the same moment when Jim Crow, the norms of Jim Crow and segregation are being imposed. So they also looked around at Black Americans and said, it is very bad to not be identified as white. If you identify as anything other than white, your rights will be infringed upon. We are white. In fact, we're going to start calling this Jewish thing, it is a religion. This is when the idea of like Jewishness as very narrowly being a religious category So there are all of these letters that all of these prominent Jewish lawyers send to the Bureau of Immigration that are in the National Archives, explaining, again, with scientific terms, which is hilarious because it's clearly made up, why Jews are white. Now, there's a special group of Jews in the same moment who say Jews aren't white, Jews are Jews, Jews are Jews. We're subscribing to the racial theory. And those were known as Zionists. And the reason, again, every single version of this is the racialization. How you racialize Jews tells me pretty much everything I need to know about what your politics are. So for Jews who are saying Jews are not white, they're Jewish, they're doing this for one of two reasons. The major reason is because for Zionists in this moment, Zionists are saying, listen, and this, of course, is really important. I'm looking at the Europeanists. This is mostly important in Europe, right? If Europe, emancipation demands changing oneself, right? Because these countries that are saying, yes, we're gonna grant you rights, you just need to rehabilitate yourself. Make yourself a little bit better so that you can really earn citizenship, right? For Jews in these countries, they say, you know what? These people are right. We are sick. We are not well. And instead of rehabilitating ourselves or changing anything about ourselves for this country, what we really need to make ourselves actually better is our own country. Once we have our own country, we will be fully rehabilitated and we will, in fact, be able to be emancipated, be fully emancipated. So Zionists were invested in this non-white, special Jewish race idea because they were trying to promote the political movement and get people to move to mandate Palestine. So when do Jews become white? I mean, I'm white today, not tomorrow. It really depends on the mood of both the person you're asking and I hate, this pains me to see, but if you go to a certain college campus today, I don't know, say Columbia, other places, right, you might hear that Jews are always white, right? And that is being used to advance a narrative about settler colonialism and genocide, because whiteness, settler colonialism, and genocide are three ideas that must coexist together. They all have to be together. And so again, the process of racialization, the project of racialization, is merely a means to an end to express some political program. And so Jews never become white because whiteness isn't real. It's not it's an expression of some political agenda. Or we're always white and we're also always black and we're also always Jewish and whatever, we're also always Asian, right? There is no actual moment in time. You can tell that I love this topic, sorry.
We have time for one more question.
When I looked up my heritage, and I looked up the heritage of other people, people were referred to as Italian or Spanish or French or Chinese. And Jews don't have that classification. They're Jews.
That's right. So I think the idea that you're speaking to is that Jewish identity, and this is, it's a frustration I share, but it's also kind of fun to mentally think about and play with. Jewish identity does not fit any of the existing boxes that exist for us in this moment. Jews do not constitute a race, because we all know race is not an actually, biologically existing category. Jews are a religion, right? Jews practice Judaism. Judaism is the religion there is a religion, but it's not, we all know also Jewishness is not just about Judaism. There's a cultural element, there's an ethnic element, there's a linguistic element, there's a shared historical past, even though that is not a singular or monolithic past. And so I think what you're pointing to is the difficulty of conceptualizing Jewish identity in the modern era, in a moment when there is both the existence of a Jewish national homeland, but of course American Jews are not actually members of that Jewish state, which means that Jews and Jewishness and studying Jews is complicated, but also mentally fun.
Yeah, because the Jews that came from Germany are not German, and the Jews who came from Russia are not Russian.
Although, many would argue they are. Many would say I'm a hyphenated, that one solution to this has been to say I'm a hyphenated Jew, I'm an American Jew, or a Jewish American. Jews have employed an array of different solutions to trying to address the absence of a sufficient identity descriptor for what it means to be Jewish. This was so fun. Let's do this again.